Hello, welcome to another live Google Hangout on the Living Income Guaranteed. And today we're going to be discussing about a very interesting and necessary subject, which is all about open source engagement, or we can call it as well peer-to-peer politics, which is a recent development and innovation in this internet era wherein information and communication technologies have been enabling ourselves to engage, participate, and communicate in ways that we weren't able to do so before. And these tools are becoming a game changer when it comes to traditional politics, and also to become part of the discussion that many times becomes something that is not readily available to many people because not many want to go to vote and so forth. So in order to provide ourselves a better view on these tools, and specifically Loomio, considering that we have the co-founder and also activist from Loomio based in New Zealand, Richard Bartlett, who is joining us early morning Monday there. Welcome to the Hangout. Thanks for being here.
Good morning, or evening, or hello.
Yes, it's midday here, Sunday. So thank you very much for being here. And we'd like to remind our viewers that we will be having this discussion for about 40 minutes, so that if you want to participate, please make sure that you have the questions right on time for about 40, maybe more. We have a bunch of questions already. So Richard, I'd like you to first look at the following point, because in these Hangouts, we are essentially a group of people that dedicate ourselves to be able to find ways in which things like direct democracy can come through. We stand by those principles, but we hadn't yet talked about the platform that enables that. So we see that social transformation requires, yes, the concept, understanding the problem, but at the same time, we require the people that know the code, so to speak, that know how to exactly create the necessary platforms that enable such changes. So can you define yourself as a person that so to speak, knows both languages, the social activism and the coding and hacking and the programming that you are as well?
Yeah, okay. I would yes, I would define myself in that category. And I'm really fortunate that so Loomio is one venture, I guess, within a larger network called Inspiral. And in this network, there's 240 people at last count, and that's sort of one of the ways that they define themselves, is sitting in this intersection between social change, I guess, or people that understand a little bit about how humans work, and then people who understand how computers work. And a lot of what we're doing is working in that intersection and going, how can we leverage the power of technology to have sort of dramatic social change outcomes. So
okay. So in that sense, can you also describe to us what Loomio is? Because many people that are watching this Hangout do not have the precise idea of what it is. So if you can just briefly describe it as well.
Yeah, cool. Loomio it's really simple. It's really straightforward. It's an online platform for groups of people to make decisions together. And for the most part, those groups are sort of in the range of somewhere between sort of 10 people up to 1,000 people. We're really aimed at groups that, for the most part, are relatively low conflict. So perhaps they know each other, or they've already got a sort of shared aim, like we're trying to do this. We're a permaculture group, or we're some kind of activists that know what they're up to. And the way the tool works is really straightforward. It's a discussion forum like any other discussion forum you've seen on the web. And the only difference is that as the discussion progresses, anyone in the group can put a proposal forward. And the proposal is just a suggested course of action. So, okay, we've heard such and such a topic being discussed in this room, and now I think it's time that we should do this course of action. You put that up, and then everyone has a chance to say, yes, I think it's a great idea. Abstain, meaning I don't really care. No, meaning I think we can do better than this. And then a block saying, if we do this, I'm going to be extremely upset. So that's pretty much the total. That's it. It's a simple piece of technology.
Yes.
But I mean, it's really great to hear the way that you're describing that intersection between politics and technology, and how important it is that the technology is, this very thin layer in front of a community. There's a community of people that are interested in organizing in different ways, and that have identified that the way that we organize is actually having dramatic outcomes. So when we organize in a sort of top-down hierarchical command and control fashion, you get some particular outcomes. You might know what it's like to work under those conditions. We can also see the effect that it's having on the planet. Whereas when you choose to organize in an alternative way, when you say, okay, we're not going to resort to a hierarchical chain of authority, you get different outcomes. So some of the outcomes are, it feels nicer to work in that environment, and hopefully it has less of a negative impact on the planet. But of course, working in that way comes with its own contradictions and challenges. And so we're very focused on, what role can technology play in solving some of those contradictions and making it more sustainable, I guess, from that perspective.
And we will be also discussing about those challenges further on into the discussion. But I'd like you, as an expert, to share with us like an open source for dummies type of explanation, and how is it that you link it also to the change of the economy in itself and means of production and all of these kind of theory between capitalism and socialism. So can you walk us a little bit through it?
Yeah, I don't know how I feel about that word expert, but I'll tell you what I know.
Sure.
So open source. So I guess, the software so right now we're using Google Hangouts, and someone's put a lot of energy into designing how the system works and wiring up all the parts in the background to make it work smoothly. And we have, you and I have the user interface in front of us, and that's the one with all the buttons, and that's the bit that we get to interact with. And behind that, there's all this code, and it'll be millions and millions of lines, complex, deep technology going on. Now, if the software is open source, then you and I will also have access to that code. So not just the bit with the buttons, but also the bit that actually defines how those buttons work. And that's the basic principle of what open source means. It means that the user has access to the guts of the machine, the logic of it, and so that means they can go in there and they can read it, they can learn and then apply it to their own thing, or it also means that they can take a copy of it and modify it to their own tastes. And that creates an opportunity, I guess, or like, an affordance for people to collaborate in a way that you can get, thousands or tens of thousands or millions of people will be collaborating on some open source projects. And so in terms of like you're talking about the means of production and these sort of political implications, this is where you get into murky territory. Where I have my my Loomio hat on as a sort of a collective identity, Loomio is very much a neutral, like, this is a platform that anyone can use. Come on in. I don't mind where you live on the political spectrum. This is the software to help people organize without hierarchy. Go for it. But where I come from a personal perspective and where my politics sit, that's a different thing. So like just talking about my personal politics and how I view open source fitting in that. There's an interesting movement, and the best name, I guess, that I've seen for it is commons-based peer production. So the two components are about the commons and about peer-to-peer. And there's not a huge amount of literature on the topic, but all of it's worth reading. So the idea of the commons is the suggestion that, if you're going to tell a very zoomed out, high level meta narrative about the history of everything, you might tell that story in terms of the commons being this publicly shared, things like air and water and nature, versus capital being this like private, I have accumulated this much and I'm putting it behind this boundary and we'll trade on these terms. And so one of the interpretations of sort of communism versus capitalism is about this tension between the private ownership and the public sharing. And we've seen, some severely negative consequences of both of those ends of the spectrum as they've been implemented in states. So you've got the commons piece, and that's an interesting piece, and it's one that I think has a huge amount of potential as a political organizing kind of focal point. And then you have the peer production. And the peer production is what I was sort of describing with open source, where you have people working as peers, as simple as that. They are in collaboration with each other. They are not in a hierarchy. At work at Loomio, we work with each other. We don't work for each other. There's not a boss. You agree together, what are we trying to achieve, and then you self-organize to say, well, I've got these skills and you've got those skills, so we'll collaborate to get it done. And once again, I think that is a focal point that could be really productive for political organizing as well. I know it feels tremendously good to work in that environment, to have that combination of a shared responsibility. So Loomio is a workers co-op, so we now have 17 workers, and for me as one of the co-founders to know that it's not just me, it's not my ego driving this thing, it's not my baby, it's like there's 17 of us holding this thing together, and we equally share that feels really great. And simultaneously seeing how people can step into that and then flourish and find their own, grow to their full potential within that, because they haven't got a rigid sort of job description or a position in a hierarchy. It's really powerful to see it at a personal level, and I think I have a hunch that it's always tricky to how much do you take your own experience and then project it onto the world, but I have a hunch that it's a kind of broadly applicable notion, this idea of the commons-based peer production.
I'd like to also ask you about, now that you've explained to us the principles and how it functions, also what drove you to create Loomio, or to be part of it, and how you got to find the people to work with as well on this project.
So I guess the drive that got it started was there was a group of us that were we were involved with sort of I guess we were doing activism, but from a more artistic sort of creative perspective than your average protest. And then this was a group that was just sort of forming without knowing what we were doing. We were just putting events on. And then after, I guess we'd been around for maybe 3 months, and then suddenly the Occupy movement took off around the world. And we could see, hey, look, this looks like another kind of activism that is new. Like, I haven't seen anything like this before. So got involved with Occupy in Wellington, and before I knew it, I went down. Honestly, I went down to just to observe it, to see what was happening. And obviously, within about 20 minutes, I was completely hooked. And this idea of, people in the public space. So in Wellington, it was in Civic Square, which is like, there's the town hall and the city library and, all these things. 300 people congregated in that space and just started talking to each other, like strangers talking to each other about the things that they thought were most important, like I'd just never seen that before. And it's so, in some ways it's so mundane. It's just people having a conversation. But from that first few minutes of that conversation, like my whole perspective on the world was on a very rapid trajectory to changing. It just sort of like, I always tell the story of my life as this like dun, 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 and then Occupy happens and it goes like it's just a real turning point for me. And so there was those first conversations, but then there was the longer process of over the next couple of months of forming a community, forming basically a little village in the middle of the city that was trying to operate on different principles from the city around it. And like all of the Occupy camps, there was this these moments of elation and like sort of transformative potential, and people having this tremendous kind of enlightening kind of experiences of direct democracy, you know, of sitting in circles and working through proposals and issues, and learning more and more about each other's perspectives and so on, and developing consensus. And then on the other hand, you had these like just crushing, heartbreaking moments of when that consensus building process breaks down, and suddenly you just, you know, you feel like you've been sitting in a meeting for half a day and you've gotten absolutely nowhere, and all of the you get to these points where you're just like, why am I even doing this? Who are these people? I don't even know them. They're all idiots. I can't agree with anything that, you know. And so we're like, this. Me and my friends, I guess we were like, you know, this is awesome. There's something great here, and it's really inspiring to us, but also it's so unreliable. Like, I can't invite just any old friend to come and join me and expect them to have a good time. And so the mission then became, you know, how do we make this more accessible? How do we make it so that anyone can come down and have a good time? And that means, how do we like identify the really great piece of this puzzle and make it more easy to share? And so at that point, we sort of activists got introduced to Inspiral, as I mentioned earlier. They are very hard to define, but they're essentially a collective of mostly technologists. That's expanding now, but mostly technologists that are dedicated their lives to making the world a better place, I guess. You know, the tagline is more people working on stuff that matters. And we talked to them and we said, hey, we heard you make technology that makes the world better. We've got this idea for a piece of technology. Can you build it? And they said, well, it doesn't really work that way, but we would like that technology too. So how about we give you a space in the office and some mentoring and connections, and you guys make it. And so then we had a very rapid process of like trying to figure out how to write software. You know, I'd had a little bit of experience here and there, and some of the other guys, John had a bit more experience, and we just, you know, started with the real basics, made the simplest possible tool that was useful to just a small group of people, and then slowly but surely went from these hobbyist beginners to now being a grown-up sort of mature project.
That's quite fascinating, because I had thought that you were first like a very experienced programmer, and then you kind of linked both worlds to make this tool for social engagement. But it seems that it went the other way around. It first was the necessity to have that tool, and then you kind of had to take on your skills and spruce them up a little bit. So I'd like to ask you then on this sort of process that goes with coding and programming, because you know, designing something also defines the way that people engage. So in terms of Loomio, how does it function in terms of changing the way that people engage, or how does it also have the potential to change the way that we live politics?
Well, the first thing, design is really challenging. You know, like it's people have really strong opinions about how you're supposed to do design. And like I say, we're beginners, we're figuring it out. And we have, I guess, adopted a principle that, I guess that really our primary design principle is about accessibility. It's about how do we build something that the greatest number of people can use? You know, what's where there really are interesting theoretical models for how you can do large-scale direct democracy. There's, you know, people exploring different options with this idea of delegating and proxying. So this is an idea that you have a vote and you can pass it on to someone else, and they can group votes and pass them on and so on. That's really an interesting model. What we have seen is the people that have implemented those models, they've done them in a way that's kind of complex, and so your average person can't just sit down and understand it immediately. And so we've really set ourselves the standard of kind of like, if someone can use email, then they can use Loomio. That's our level of sort of tech comfortability. Like, I understand there's plenty of people that don't have access to email, and that's one problem. But we're saying if you can reach that bar, then this is the tool designed for you. And because of that constraint, you know, that's really shaped the direction of development. So in the first couple of weeks after we really got the idea going, we had something released, which was it was a pie graph and 4 buttons and nothing else. So you could put the proposal up and you could send a link to your friends and say, this is the proposal, what do you think? And there was no room for any kind of discussion or anything like that. It was just the simplest, tiniest little piece of use for someone. We gave that to people, and then we said, what do you need next? You know, and so that's been the principle driving us as well. So we give the smallest useful thing, and then say what's missing, and then hear from everyone and go, okay, well, obviously you need to have a discussion. Okay, well, now we'll build you a discussion next to it, and then the next, okay, well, people are having all these discussions, they need to group them together. So, okay, we need a group, you know, and it's sort of, that's how the software has evolved, is just really focus on what is the next most important thing that someone needs. And that, I guess, the point of difference, I guess, from Loomio as compared to any other discussion forum is that in an email thread or a Facebook thread or Reddit or whatever, you have this, it's a beautiful environment for divergent thinking, you know, like anyone can throw a new idea and they can share a link or an image or whatever, and you can scatter all across. But when it comes down to actually condensing and converging down onto some kind of point of agreement, all those tools really, you know, they're not designed for that job. And so this proposal functionality is just designed to drive you to a point in time and say, is this a fair summary of where we've gotten to, or is this a good next step that we should take? And quite frequently, you'll say, is this a fair summary? And the answer will be no. And it actually takes a few iterations until you get there, but it does give you that point of, you know, you have the divergent, we're talking to each other, we're getting different ideas, and then converging on some kind of conclusion so that you can move forward.
So in terms of removing the middleman or disintermediation, all of this process where people have direct access to deciding, proposing, communicating their pros and cons, how do you see this also will affect that we can live politics at large? Because I understand that Loomio is designed also for communities and small organizations at the same time. You will also share with us if it has been used for greater groups. But in terms of this process, what would you say that, why is it important to develop this kind of direct approach?
Yeah, so I would say it's probably fair to say that each of us working on the project have some ambitions about politics at large, or not ambitions, but, you know,
aspirations,
aspirations about what the future of politics might look like, and how technology might change the way that we engage with politics. So there is definitely that sort of interest in the background, and we've sort of, as a project, chosen to focus right on the small scale and say, you know, democracy is not an institution that lives in Capitol Hill. You know, democracy is a skill that you practice with your friends. That's where you start from. So whether you live in a house with half a dozen people and you're you know, figuring out together how to live, or just, you know, that experience where you've got a group of half a dozen friends, you're out in the city, and someone says, you know, let's go get lunch at such and such a place, and then people go, yeah, okay, let's do that. Like, that was just democracy that happened, you know. And you can actually develop that skill and get better at it. And so we're saying, you know, my perspective is sort of, if you can develop that skill and get better at expressing your perspective and hearing someone else's perspective, and then learning how to find the common ground between the two. If we have lots and lots of people doing that in their own little groups, that the emergent sum total of that is going to be a better political state. That's a sort of hypothesis that we're carrying. And as that translates to, you know, really large scale, we don't know. So in the current sort of format of Western democracies that is pretty common, you have this idea of an election every 3 or 4 years, where you go down to a polling booth and you tick a box and then you depart. And there are other avenues for engagement, but that's the main moment that everyone sort of revolves around on that periodic cycle. and the people that are actually making the decisions after that point, you know, you've elected a team of people to go and do the democracy bit. The experience that they're having is completely discontinuous from the experience that you're having. So your experience is you're hearing a bunch of media campaigns and then trying to choose from them, like, that one's the best one, go, good luck. Their experience is they're negotiating with each other, they're making deals, they're like, got all kinds of different agendas that are playing out in front and in behind, and they're doing the democracy bit, you know, the complex human exchange. And for me, it's problematic that there's such a discontinuity. And I don't know what the answer is to completely remove the discontinuity, but I think the moment that we all engage with once every 3 or 4 years, we could design that to be more in line with what the actual daily practice of democracy looks like. And the best hint, I guess, I've seen for what that might look like. So in Spain right now, you might be aware, there's a really interesting political movement called Podemos. And Podemos are organized in circles. And so these circles are defined geographically. So, you know, all across Spain, you've got towns and villages and cities that have circles that are meeting in person, and they're doing that general assembly, they're sitting in circles, they're practicing direct democracy. They also organize thematically, so they might have a circle about economics or women's rights or environmentalism or so on. And in combination with those in-person physical meetings, they're also using a lot of online technology. And so they're using Reddit and Agora, and they're using Loomio as well. And what you're seeing there is a social movement first, you know, like they are people on the ground with experience of organizing, and they understand their local context, and they are developing their local political power, and they've set their trajectory. And then the technology is coming in behind them, trying to prop them up and make their job a little bit easier. And to create a connection between the grassroots, the people that are distributed all across the country, and then the representatives in the party that are going into parliament. And that's a hugely complex challenge, and the models are not all in place, you know. So in the case of Podemos and Loomio, there's been more than 1,500 groups start, and they've all been started independently by different people. You know, there wasn't one person that said, okay, we need a group for each of these cities. You know, the people in each of those cities went, we need a Loomio group, and then they started. And so we've got all these independent circles having their their online decision-making process and independent circles all across Loomio. And we've been in conversation with people at Podemos and doing some design work to go, well, how can we combine all those circles in a way that preserves that unique principle of local democracy, but then form some kind of way of amassing them together. And all we've got so far is what we call an index. So you can go to one page and you can see these are all of the discussions, these are all the decisions, these are all of the groups within this wider network. So that's the first little step, is just creating that visibility. And then we haven't designed the next step, but I have a theory about what it might be. And the idea that excites me is, so you have these thousands of groups across the country that are already practicing direct democracy. What if you could put a proposal to all of those thousands of groups, and you say, I think that our party should support such and such. And that would go out to these thousands of groups, and each group has their local independent deliberation. You know, they just talk to each other about it and see what they think. At the same time, every one of those other groups around the country is having the same conversation, and they can see each other. And then you could imagine in a situation like that, there might be some consensus building across one part of the country, and then you could see, oh look, there's actually a huge controversy over in Barcelona. Why have they got a problem with it? And you could zoom in and see, okay, look, someone has actually raised this really important issue, and that information sort of traveling through the network and then spreading back and forth, and you'd have this sort of weather map of consensus building across the country. That gets me really excited.
It sounds really exciting, and it's precisely what we want also to happen. First of all, a little bit going back to what you were mentioning, I fully agree that this is such an important first step or training space also for ourselves as people to get comfortable with making decisions, with realizing that, yes, my vote can affect a larger process, which we are so devoid of in our current society we're in. As you were mentioning, we vote only for every 4 years, and we don't even know if that counts, and we are completely like detached from everything political. So this tool, I do agree that it is a very cool way to start getting comfortable with that ability to make decisions, and also to get to agreements, which from our perspective and all our discussions throughout these Hangouts, it is one of the most difficult things to get to an agreement of doing something and having that majority vote and even participation in it, because there's also another aspect in this that is mentioned with the native digital citizens, or the ones that are not the natives, or people that are not familiar with technology and that can get out of the discussion. So what's your perspective on this as well? And if technology can become too intimidating, I know that Loomio is quite simplistic, but how would you find a way to make people that are not as familiar with this tool or with other tools to realize the potential of it and kind of walk them through the fears and resistances that they might have to this kind of engagement?
There are a lot of legitimate concerns with technology, and I'd say first and foremost, I'm not really interested in replacing people's face-to-face interactions. You know, in the groups that I use Loomio with, we have a combination of face-to-face meetings and then Loomio as a space that we can make decisions between those meetings. And the two actually support each other. But it's often the case if you go to an activist group, say, or some kind of community group, and you say, hey, I'd like to start using this tool, people go, does that mean you want to like stop us from meeting together? Which is a real threat, because you like the meeting, that's where you get your solidarity from. That's the, you know, I feel so much better expressing myself in this context and so on. So it's important that it's seen, I think, as an additional route for access. It's not the sum total. And sure, some groups are using it purely without any kind of face-to-face interaction, but that's not really the aim of what we're trying to achieve. And more broadly with the digital divide, I mean, it's a really, like I was saying about we've set our level of technical competency at, can you use email? If you can use email, you should be able to use the software. The whole question of who has access is really vexed. It's a really deep challenge, and besides making it as easy as possible and as accessible as possible, I don't know. You know, on the one hand, it seems like the progress of the internet and the expansion of the internet, it's kind of unstoppable, you know, and it's got its own trajectory to it. And from my perspective, it seems kind of inevitable that we'll be using digital technology to make decisions as groups. That's just like, seems like an inevitable place that we're going to go. And there's any number of different parties that could be building those technologies for decision making online. And we sort of saw that it's likely that these technologies are going to start emerging, and we should get in there and bring our particular perspective on it, and try and provide decision-making functionality online that is designed for something other than making a huge profit for a small number of people, you know? So
that's also my next question, because you have defined Loomio as a social enterprise, and there has been like a search of many other projects that have this humanitarian intent and with the social entrepreneurship. So I'd like to know, how is it being sustained at the moment, if you can talk about that, and also whether you see it as profitable in the long run, or if it is already profitable.
So the short history of the financial situation of Loomio, when we first got started, it was what they call bootstrapping. There was no money involved. We're just volunteers trying an idea out. And then after a few months, we're like, okay, this seems like it could be serious. There's a lot of people asking for this thing. So we basically got money from our family and our friends, and sort of got some loans together. And then last year we ran a crowdfunding campaign, which was incredible. We had 1,640 something people from all around the world giving us their hard-earned money and saying, "Keep going, you're awesome, do it." So that's provided the sort of the seed capital. If we were in startup land, that would be what they call that. And at the same time as we're using that to just to pay a couple of developers the bare minimum to stay alive to get the thing done. We also work with organizations. So this is actually quite a common model for open source projects, is we offer services. So we go into organizations, so our local city council, for instance, or government departments in New Zealand, and we provide the software, but we also provide them with the training on how to be more collaborative and how to bring more participation into the way that they do their policy development. And that's that kind of consulting work is great. It's a good example for me of what a social enterprise is, because I feel like it's having really positive social impact, and because of the way the market has decided what consultants are worth, it pays really well too. So that's the sort of short-term money picture, and the long-term one is, I think everyone working on the project would say, we've got quite large ambitions for how big we think this thing should be. I would love for this idea of online direct democracy sort of decision making becomes as common as email. I have been quoted to have said, I think it should be really widespread. And the question is, how do we fund software at that scale? And at the moment, the vast majority of online platforms are funding that development based on, number one, selling advertising, number two, selling your private information. And so we've said, no, we're not going to do those things. And so that puts us into a new creative territory to go, well, how are we going to fund this? And essentially the guts we're looking at is, how do we, how can we take money from the people that have it so that the people that don't have it can use the thing for free? That's the business model that we're aiming for. And so right now, if you go to lumio.org/pricing, you'll see the particular pricing model we're testing at the moment is, if you're in a formal organization that has a budget, we ask you to pay $1 a month per user. And if you don't have any money, you don't have to pay. And the only deterrent to people abusing that system is that periodically in those what we call donation-based groups, there'll be an ask that just goes to all the members and says, hey, do you want to support the development of Loomio? Here's a link to go and throw some money in the hat. So that's the model we're chasing at the moment. We don't know if it's going to work, but we are committed to that principle that, money is not going to be a barrier to people participating in this thing. It doesn't make any sense if money's a barrier. And at the same time, we need to make this thing sustainable if it's going to have the positive social impact that we want it to be.
I ask because, we propose the provision of a living income or a basic income for everyone that requires it, such as all kinds of developers that might have their project in the making and at the same time cannot make any profit of it because it's not really done already. So we also see that the kind of work that you guys do should be well paid, because it is of extreme importance to us for these kind of social movements and development in politics and so forth. So that is for your awareness that we would like people like you and others that struggle throughout the process of making these kind of programs and apps and platforms, so that they could get a basic income and so live well, have their basics covered, and at the same time continue being motivated by the importance that they see in the development of these tools. So I'd like to ask you very briefly what your perspective on this is, and also as a way to cover the gap now that technological unemployment is now here. So what are your thoughts on basic income as well from this perspective?
We're in an interesting position in New Zealand. So New Zealand is one of the more progressive countries as far as our attitudes to social issues, So we're the first country in the world to have a transgender mayor and a transgender member of parliament. Things like this where In some countries, that's like the biggest deal in the world. Here, it's like, okay, that person wanted to be mayor. and there's plenty of issues like that where you can point to and say, yep, New Zealand, they are more progressive than the average Western democracy. And so from my perspective and from the tone of the conversation here, and similarly, I would point to Scandinavia and say that they have a similar standard of progressive. The conversation about the universal basic income is the conversation is getting louder and more common, and it seems like we're on that track to inevitability, where it's just so obvious that the way that we currently do welfare involves so many trade-offs that it's quite easy to imagine a different way of doing welfare that has better outcomes for less expense. Like that idea, I think the time is ripe, and I'm an enthusiastic supporter of the idea. At the same time, I'm also cautious of the potency of any idea, and then how it can be reinterpreted by different different political interests to serve the same agendas that they've always held. So one of the basic principles is, as I understand it, of a universal basic income is that you give everyone the same. You say everyone is entitled to this amount of money every week. And I guess my concern about that model is that it plays into this idea of the level playing field, that says, hey, look, everyone's got the same, everyone's starting from the same position. And so if you are are in some kind of dire straits, that's your own fault, because everyone got the same, and this person, made a success out of it, and you made a failure out of it, therefore it's your fault. And I don't think that's a realistic view of the world, but I do think it's a very compelling story that politicians can use. And I don't think it's very helpful. So I am excited about the basic income, and I am cautious of it at the same time, I'd say.
Okay, it's reasonable skepticism at the same time. And we have a comment from Kathy Kraft, and she's saying, what I like is that this could definitely be a great tool to also ensure there is accuracy in what we are seeing reported on the television. That's an interesting use. What's your perspective?
Yeah, I don't have a huge amount of experience with television. As I was saying, this is the story of my life. The story when I got rid of my TV, my life certainly got a lot better at that point. But clearly television is one of those avenues where people point their attention in the same direction for a moment, whether that's current affairs or politics or media, or if it's Game of Thrones, it doesn't matter what it is. The idea that people are focusing their attention on something and at one moment in time and going, this is what I'm interested in. And the limitation of television is that it's a one-way medium. There's a broadcast that starts in some centralized point and it goes out to a population. And sure, I mean, technology on the whole, digital technology on the whole, is in the process of breaking down that idea of a one-way conversation and creating avenues for people to turn the conversation back around and have the audience actually look at each other and say, what did you think about that? And we hear plenty of mundane conversations about what did you think about that? Can you believe that person just died on Game of Thrones? But you could also imagine that kind of conversation being used for productive ends if instead of Game of Thrones, we were talking about real politics and the real wars that are going on and so on, right? And to a certain extent, you do see that on discussion forums, and Reddit's a big one that you'll see people having a conversation about a political event that's happening as it's happening, and Twitter as well. You'll see people sort of forming a parallel communication chain that there might be. You might have the president giving a speech, and at the same time, there's this back channel on Twitter. And I guess the difference between those tools and with what Loomio is trying to do is that with Loomio, we would have a specific group of people who had organized themselves on this principle of, okay, we want to respond to televised political events and check their accuracy or something. Like you'd actually have a group that was their intention, and then they'd create a space where that was what they were doing, which is a kind of a different way of doing things.
Yes, and it also relates to how we use tools, because the same Lumio platform can be used to discuss, as you were saying, Game of Thrones and what they thought about it, and instead of politics and real decision-making processes that affect people directly. So that's also an interesting remark that we have to make, and also how we use social media. So we've reached the end of the Hangout, but I'd like to ask if you have any other last pointers as to where you're going with Loomio, if you have any direction at the moment or any other projects that you'd like to share about. This is the time to share it.
Okay, cool. I'd say very briefly where we're going with Loomio. We've got so I said we did crowdfunding last year, and the crowdfunding campaign was to basically rebuild. We'd understood the prototype, we've got it out there, we've learnt what people need, and then the job was, okay, we're going to build from scratch, knowing what this design is. And we're in this position. We're in the home stretches of getting this full, what we call the 1.0 release out the door. We're just doing the kind of detail bits at the moment, and I'd love to be able to give a date and say it's going to be at such and such, but it's a fuzzy world. Software development, it's very hard to put timers on it, but it's coming very shortly, and I'm really, really excited, because at that point we have the core technology in place that will then enable us to, well, number one, like I said, accessibility. It's going to be, we're aiming to create the most accessible discussion platform on the web, and I mean accessible, say for instance, people with vision impairment. We've been doing a project specifically about how do you navigate the web when you're not using your eyes, if you're using your ears instead. So that whole aspect is really, really exciting. And then there's this other kind of accessibility, which is about interoperability. So Loomio playing well with other tools, so other platforms that people might already be using, and ways of interfacing with that. And then also within Loomio, creating, so for instance, the idea of a decision plugin. So instead of using a proposal, you might want to use a temperature check or a majority vote or a poll, or there might be any number of different decision-making modules that you want to plug in. So we're sort of laying all of the technical foundations so that we can start playing with more different options within the software, as well as branching out to other points in the software. So I'm really excited about all that stuff, but that's because I'm a nerd. Mostly I'm excited about what all the cool people are doing with it. Like all the like I say, there's like just the little permaculture groups and like the kind of work that you're doing. Every day we get to see who's signing up to using this thing, and it's just thousands and thousands and thousands of very small groups of people that have dedicated their lives to doing something useful in the world. And it's a really privileged and motivating position to be in, to see this. And I'm like, that's what we're here for, is making it easier for those kind of groups to organize in a like fair, human, democratic way.
Yes, and I thank you as well for that, because it was certainly something that is necessary and that emerged as part of the principles that we saw were lacking in our society. So thank you to you and all the team behind Loomio as well. We have a last comment from Hilda Ratz, and she's saying, I agree that the universality of the basic income guaranteed is an issue, but it is nicely covered and solved in the living income proposal, which is what we proposed, which I warmly recommend to read. So
yeah, for sure. Send it through to me. It's a holiday today in New Zealand, so I've got plenty of time for reading.
Awesome. Yeah, because we are very much, in conjunction with these principles behind direct democracy and participation and removing our apathy and getting to make effective decisions. We are also then proposing living income, as well as many other changes in the economy and at a political level that we haven't seen yet being proposed as part of the basic income in itself. So that's why we created the living income proposal, which is, yes, the provision of a basic income, not universal. So you will read more on that as well. And if you would like to also come and share about peer-to-peer some other time, it would be very cool, because that is also like part of the necessary changes that we require in order to stop the centralization of things, which is a whole other topic as well.
Yeah, sure.
So thank you for being here and for your time, and thank you, the viewers, as well, for joining us today. I'll just read the last comment from Kathy. She's saying, love this idea, Richard. Much success to Loomio. We will be here watching. Thanks, and thanks, Marlen.
Thanks, Kathy. Thanks, Marlen.
So see you guys next time, next Sunday for another live hangout, and enjoy. Bye.